What's going on, guys? In this video, we are going to be learning slicing and indexing of a data frame. So by slicing or indexing, we can look at certain parts of a data frame, basically subsets of a data frame based on either conditions or based on the rows and columns that you want to see. So now this is very useful for data exploration, or if you want to grab a subset of the data based on some condition. Now we're going to go over some of the basic methods or some of the most popular methods for slicing and indexing. All right, with that said, let's just get started. So once again, we import pandas and as PD because that is the convention. And what we're going to do is read a CSV file. Now I have a movie.csv file. I think I've gotten it from the internet, but it's used a lot within Pandas books and tutorials. Now, so we're going to read the CSV, and set index is basically just setting the index to a certain column name. So there's a column called director name, and I'm going to be setting the index of the data frame to the director name. And then you have sort index, which is just going to be sorting the index. So all of the director names are going to be sorted alphabetically. So we're applying just a few pre-processing steps to make the data frame more readable. So let's just run this. And now we're going to take a look at our data frame. Notice within the brackets, I'm using 10. So df.head has the option of giving it a number. So if you don't give it a number within the constructor, or in this case, within the method, what happens is that you automatically just see the first 5 rows. But if you do put a number within the method, if you do give it an argument, then you're allowed to see that number amount of rows. So in this case, we put in 10, so we will see the first 10 rows. And if you look at the first 10 rows, you have a bunch of director names, color, I'm not sure what that is, a number of critics for reviewers, duration, director Facebook likes, actor 3 likes, blah, blah. So there's a lot of columns here, you'll see. And we're not going to worry too much about the columns because I just want to teach you guys slicing and indexing. However, wherever you get the data from, you should really understand what each column is representing. So what's num critic for reviewers? What's duration? Is it the movie, etc.? So you should know exactly what your data is. You should really explore and understand what the columns are even before you even try to put it into a data frame. So you really want to understand what your columns are going to be representing. All right. With that said, let's just move on. So we're going to be exploring head and tail first. So head and tails allows us to access X amount of rows, with head being the first X amount of rows and tail being the last X amount of rows. So here, df.head with 1 will allow us to see the first row and just the first row, and df.tail will allow us to see the last 4 rows. So these are the last 4 rows, and as you can see, there's a lot of NaN values, which I'll have to go over in the future. So that's how you see either the first X rows or the last X rows. All right, now we're going to learn how to access the columns. So let's just go back up here, and we have a data frame with a bunch of columns, and sometimes that can be too much information. So in this case, if you just look at the data frame and just the first 10 rows, you have way too many columns, and this could be an information overload. So what you want to do is you want to be able to subset part of the data frame, and you can easily do that in Pandas. So it's very similar to list slicing, except for inserting numbers. What you're going to do is insert the column name. So let's go back up here, and we have num critic for reviews. So we're going to be accessing this column. So if I go back here, all I do is put num critic for reviews within quotation marks and within 2 brackets, similar to a list, and we're going to see the first 10 rows of that column. And as you can see, we see the indices, which is represented by director name because that's what I labeled it, and then we'll see the values from num critic for reviews. So if I go back up here, num critic for reviews, these are the values, and you can see that these values are represented here, and that's all we get. So instead of getting the entire data frame, we just get this column. Now there's another way to actually access the column, and then you can use it with the dot notation. So df.dot and the name of the column. So it's very similar to what we did up here, except for we're using a dot notation. Now, if your column name has spaces, you can't use the dot notation. So the dot notation cannot be used with spaces. So if your column name does have spaces, you have to refer back to this sort of list notation. Let's just run this, and you'll see we get the same exact values as we did above. Now, if you want to access multiple columns, what we do is we insert a list with the multiple column names. So if I just go back up here, we're going to be accessing numcritic for reviews and actor3 Facebook likes. So let's go back down. So numcritic for reviews, comma, actor3 Facebook likes. And it's all within a list. So this is how you access multiple columns. All right. And we're just accessing the first 10 rows. That's it. So we get numcritic for reviews and actor3 Facebook likes. Now here's just another example. I'm not sure why I did another example, but here we go. So now we're using numcritic for reviews and duration, and we're only getting the first 10. All right, so that was columns. That was pretty easy. Now row selection. Row selection can be done very similar to list slicing. So here, if we want to see the first 3 rows, all we have to do is colon and 3. So let's just go back up here. For columns, we have to insert the name, a string. But for rows, we just include the row numbers. So if I run this, you'll see I get back the first 3 rows, and 27 columns. So very similar to list slicing. Now, what you can do actually is after you get the rows you want, you can actually put in the column you want. So in this case, we'll get the first 3 rows, and then after that, we want the column duration. So it's sort of like chaining. You're chaining one method to another method. So the outcome of the first method will be chained to the second method. So here we'll get the first 3 rows and then just the duration column. There you go. So if you go back up here, duration 97, 87, 100, and we were able to extract just that column. Now, if you want to extract multiple columns, once again, you just put a list of all the column names you want to extract. So once again, chaining to the first 3 rows, we want to extract duration and actor2 name. Now we have even more methods of trying to subset or slice data frames. Now we have something called loc, which is going to be label-based. df.loc allows you to subset or slice a data frame based on the labels. So if you go look at director name, you'll see they're all sorted. So if you want to go from A Raven Cruz to say a certain name, Adam Brooks, we can do that. So sometimes it's easier because when you're dealing with names, you know the names if they're in alphabetical order. But with numbers, it's hard to tell, like what's going to be number 10? Is that Adam Brooks? Or is that Steven Spielberg? Who is that? But with names, you know the names. So sometimes using names or strings to filter or index or slice your data frame might be easier. So here we want A.Ravencruz to Adam Brooks. And we're going to plot all of these rows. So A.Ravencruz all the way to Adam Brooks. So the first 6 rows. So instead of actually knowing that these guys represent the first 6 rows, you could just use the names itself. And now with df.loc, if you want a certain column, you have to put the column name. So here we have A.Ravencruz to Adam Brooks, which represents the rows, and then numcritic for reviews represents the columns. And in this case, just one column. And we run this, and now we just get back the one column instead of the entire data frame. Now, once again, you could put multiple columns on numcritic for views using list notation. So we have numcritic for views and color. And if I run this now, we get back 2 columns instead of 1. All right, so that was df.loc. Now we have iloc, which is actually integer-based locating or location. So now, instead of using names, we can use integer-based. And this is very similar to what we did earlier here, except for everything is going to be integer-based. So the rows and columns are also going to be integer-based. Now, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I guess we don't really need this, but it's just good to have multiple options. All right, so with iloc, we're going to extract the first 6 rows. There we go. All right, the first 6 rows by using list notation or list slicing. And now if you want to do the first 6 rows and the first 3 columns, that's easily done as well. This is very similar to NumPy slicing. So the first 6 rows and the first 3 columns, or from 1 to 3. So let's go here, numCritic for views. So we skip the first row, we include the second row, and we include duration. So it's 2 and 3. We get back numCritic for reviews, duration. So we skip the first one, it's from 1 to 3. So we skip 0, we get 1 and 2. And 0, 6, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Now you can also have sort of scattered indices. So if you want to get the first, third, fifth, and the first and third row, you can do that as well using list notation. Very simple. So it's Aaron, Han, Seltzer, and Brooks. Okay. So basically, and then the first and third. So we skip the 0, 1, skip 2, and 3. So we numCritic for reviews and director Facebook likes. All right, very simple. Now let's get into some interesting stuff. Boolean indexing. Now sometimes you might want to index or slice based on some conditions, like how long was this movie? I want to get all the movies that are greater than 120 minutes, etc. Or number of critics for reviews that are greater than 100. So here you can use loc or iloc, but we'll go with loc. And what we want to do is df.numCritic for reviews that are greater than 100. So you want to pull out all of the rows that are greater than 100 when it comes to number of critic for reviews. So once again, we want to pull out all the rows where the number of critic for reviews is greater than 100. So that's the row. Remember, the first part is the row, and the second part is the column. And once we do that, we want only the column duration. So number of critic for reviews greater than 100. So in this case, this will not go. This will be rejected, but Adam Brooks should be accepted. So this is Boolean indexing. Based on a condition, we want to pull out certain rows. All right, so here we go. We get Adam Brooks. And remember, this row is actually duration. So what I should do is actually, to make it easier for you guys, what I'll do is here we go. So I've actually made column the column that we're Boolean indexing on. So as you can see, all of them are greater than 100. So this is Boolean indexing. It's very, very useful. Now you can actually compound Boolean indexing similar to the AND statement. So we'll have 2 conditions here. This has to be greater than 100, and the director Facebook likes have to be greater than 100 as well. Now when you do compounding, you have to make sure you use brackets for each part of the condition. So in the compound, there's multiple conditions. So for each condition, you want to make sure you put brackets. And I think you have to use the AND symbol as opposed to just AND. You guys can play around with that and see. So you have 2 brackets around the first condition, 2 brackets around the second condition, and we'll run just the head, the first 5 rows. All right, so after the condition is met, we get the first 5 rows of the outcome of the condition. It's not just the first 5 rows, it's the outcome of the condition. So here we get Adam Green, McKay, etc. So we're looking for number of critics reviews over 100. As you can see, these are all over 100. And director Facebook likes over 100. As you can see, these are all over 100. If we change it to 200, Adam Green should be knocked out. And Adam Green is knocked out. So it's only Adam McKay. Basically, number of Facebook likes over 285. All right. Now, sometimes you want an exact match. You can also do that with Boolean indexing. So run this. And you'll see number of critic for reviews equals 100. And all of them are 100. Now, sometimes you want to use not. And the way to use not is this squiggly sign. I'm not sure what the name is, but so not greater than 100. So basically less than 100. And not greater than 100. So basically less than 100 or equal to 100. Run this. And there we go. So we get number of critic for viewers less than 100 and number of Facebook likes less than 100. Here we go, less than 100. And this is just another example. And here we're actually doing something a little more clever. We want all of the director names, the actor names that start with V. So here you have to use .string .starts with. And this is something we can go over in the future videos when we use something like apply. And there we go. So now we pulled out all of the actor names with V. Now the last part that I want to go over is callable. So it's very similar to Boolean indexing, but these callables are actually very useful when you use apply. In this case, we're not going to go over apply yet. We'll just look at some simple cases, but basically you can use lambda functions within the df.loc. So the conditionals can be extended to use lambdas. And here, if we use the dot notation, we basically use lambda df, and with the df, you can actually use the dot notation to access a certain series. So here we're using lambda df because you have to access the data frame when you're using lambda in this situation. And then once you access the data frame, then you could access parts of the data frame. So in this case, we'll access the series. We'll say .numCritic for reviews greater than 100. So very similar to above, but lambdas will shine when we apply it to series. And I'll do that in the future videos. And there we go. And we get the same thing as the Boolean indexing. Number of critic for reviews, you'll see they're all above 100. Now, if you want to do the other way, basically here we use the dot notation, but if you want to just pass in the column name as a list, you don't use the dot notation, you just pass in the column name as a list, as it is. So here, we're going to be accessing all the rows, but just a specific column. So numCritic for reviews. And same notation as above, lambda, you have to pass in the data frame, and then once you have access to the data frame, you can pass in the column name itself. And here's another way of slicing, just for the column name. All right, so that was, I guess, a simple introduction to slicing and indexing. Now, Pandas has a lot of stuff to it. I'm going over basically the basics, but there's actually a lot to learn, and there's a lot of crazy things you can do. It's a very big library with lots of methods or lots of functionality. I'm just trying to cover at least the small surface of it, and then we'll try to do some sort of data analysis sort of problem or project. All right, so that's it with this video. I will see you guys in the next video.